So today I want to run you through a quick demo on how to use a multimeter. Now the multimeter that we're going to focus on today is made by Klein Tools and it's an MM600. It's kind of their mid-tier multimeter. I just upgraded to this one from an MM400. What we'll focus on is measuring voltage, resistance, temperature, and capacitance. I want to get you comfortable with the most common features that you're going to use on electrical and HVAC and possibly even automotive if you're troubleshooting some issues with your car or truck. So let's jump in. We'll start off with voltage and we'll also talk about that big safety concern I want to make sure you're aware of. So starting off, if you just got your multimeter, there's a good chance that your probes come with these category 3-4 covers on them. So I would pop those off because you're going to need the category 2 probes for testing outlets. There's a simple order of operation for connecting your probes to the outlet. You always want to start off with your black probe going into the neutral or ground side depending on what you're measuring. Here I'll put it in the ground side. Then you would introduce your red probe into the hot side. You do not want to start off with the red probe or take out the black probe with the red still attached to the hot side. If you do that, that can cause a safety issue, and let me demonstrate that for you. So now even with the probe just sitting out here, because I have my hot side connected up, my non-contact voltage tester indicates that this probe right here is live. So that is equivalent of sticking a knife in the hot side, sticking a wire in the hot side, and now this is live and obviously can arc against anything that would ground it. Always start off with the neutral or ground side and then connect the hot. So for voltage, let's go over the basics. You turn the selection dial to V with the sine wave and also the straight and dashed line. Now the white sine wave you'll see here, that means you're going to measure AC voltage. If you wanted to switch to DC, you just press selection and now we're over in DC. You can see auto is indicated here. That means it is auto ranging. That is a newer feature for multimeters. If you're used to having an old one, like here's an old cheap one, you had to turn the dial to where you wanted to test. This would be measuring AC voltage up to 1000, max 250, max 50, so on, and then you'd have all these selections for your DC side as well. So older meters, like this super cheap one here, had a ton more selections. So back to the MM600, if you wanted to auto range, that's fine. You can also, if I go back to AC voltage, you can set your own range. So now we're off auto. This is going to max out at a AC voltage of 9.999. This would be 99.99, and then this would be 999.9. Now this is what I would use to measure at an outlet on a 120 circuit. This would be the correct range if I was setting it. Now if you need backlighting, you just hold this down, hold it down to turn it off, and this also momentary press of the hold will hold a measurement. So if you see a measurement, you want to hold it, you just press that and then that will hold that measurement and you can turn it off. Maximum and minimum, this will set where it will be measuring the maximum voltage during the test period and vice versa, minimum voltage during the test period, or you just hold it down and that's going to go back to auto. Now that switched it back to auto range as well. So if you wanted to go back to your range that you wanted set, you would just set that to measure 999.9, which is the correct range. Now, if you try to measure 120 volts and you have it in this range, let me show you what you'll see. So if you've manually selected your range, but it is not correct, you're going to see an OL, or outside the limits. It's basically an error coming up. Now remember, always take the hot side off first. And now we're back. So if we wanted to set a range, even this range, right, because this would be 99.9, would still give us an OL. So now we'll read out our 121, so 120. Again, if you wanted to just read out the max, as you get slight fluctuations in the AC voltage, it is going to only record the maximum voltage. So you can see we just got a little blip come through. This can be handy, not super handy for a normal DIYer, but depending on the application. Now, if you're troubleshooting and you want to also measure between the ground, that's where black probe would just go to the ground, and then red would go to the hot side, and then you'll measure the difference across the ground to hot. For me, a common application for DC voltage, which you just set your selection dial to V and then press select, so you see the solid and dashed line. Now you're in DC voltage. Same way, you can change your range. Here, this is a 12 volt system, so I'll set it to a max of 99.99 volts. Then I'd put the black probe on the negative and the red probe on the positive, and I'm reading 12.92, which would indicate a strong battery. But if I want to check my alternator, I'll start the engine and then do the same check and expect to get higher than that voltage, indicating that the alternator is actually charging the battery. And we do with 14.12 volts. Now that's it for voltage, so let's move on to resistance. Now the most common thing that I do in resistance is actually a continuity check, and the setting is really the default setting. It's the white setting here. So the white settings across the dial are the primary, and then the orange are the secondary. That's where you press that selection. So if you wanted to measure just the actual resistance, you would press it once. If you want to measure and test a diode, you'd press that twice. But I'm looking for the audible alarm to help with the continuity check. Now the most common application that I use that for is maybe tracking down Romex wires or troubleshooting something like an extension cord. So I put the alligator clip on one side. These do actually come in handy. And then I will test my continuity to the other end of the extension cord. All right, we have continuity. Now, a common issue is you have an intermittent failure. Maybe you have an internal wire that's starting to fray, and at certain angles it's not working, other angles it is. So what I use then is called a wiggle test. So I'll demonstrate it, and then I'll describe what I'm doing at the end. So in this case, this extension cord passed the wiggle test. So what was I doing? The audible alarm indicates we have continuity all the way through the extension cord. Then one of the weakest points of an extension cord is where it goes through bending depending on its use case. So that's why there's this reinforcement here, is because that's one of the weakest points. If there was an intermittent failure, if you started to have a weak connection, then when you do the wiggle test, you would start to hear intermittent on off of that audible alarm, and that would indicate, okay, we do start to have a failure here. Sometimes it's working, sometimes it isn't, and we need to replace this. So continuity checks and using that wiggle test are the most common use cases that I use. Now for automotive, you might need to use the resistance check. Works the same. It auto ranges from mega ohms to kilo ohms to ohms. You can range it yourself if you want to. And this is most common. Maybe you're troubleshooting what's called a shunt resistor that's part of a system that has an issue, and you're just making sure that it has the desired resistance and that that is not the issue. All right, let's move on to a cool little one that, depending on the meter you have, the brand and model, for temperature, which is pretty handy. So temperature is super simple. So all we're going to do is there's a little adapter that came with the kit, and this is an adapter for K-type thermocouples. That'll plug in, and then we'll match up our positive side here to the positive side on the top of the black housing. And then what that actually gives us is a small, what is called a thermocouple, which measures temperature. So we just turn it to temperature, and then that's going to give this the reading of the room. The most common thing I use this for is HVAC. So maybe I just want to see how cold the air is coming out of the air vent. Maybe there's an issue with the air conditioning. or I'm trying to balance a system between the first floor and second floor. So I'll take my measurement on the first floor, maybe I'll do a max, and I'll let it take a measurement for about 15 minutes, letting it get to steady state. Take that measurement on my first floor, then I'll go up to my second floor, do the same thing for 15 minutes, and then that will get me my different temperatures to help me when I'm trying to balance the system. So that's really it on temperature. Very handy feature and very easy to use. On to the last one, and that is going to be capacitance. Similar to temperature, capacitance is a pretty short one, and that's because I really only use this to measure capacitors. Usually within my HVAC system, I had a failure not too long ago on the blower motor where my 5 microfarad capacitor was not reading out within the tolerance range. So I was able to identify that with my multimeter, and then I knew exactly that I needed to replace that component, and that honestly saved me hundreds of dollars compared to bringing a technician out. I was able to order it online, get it in less than 2 days, and then install that and solve my problem. So capacitors can come in handy for some of those critical capacitors usually found in your HVAC system, but also found across a few other systems that you might run into. Hopefully that helps you guys out. We've reviewed voltage, both AC and DC, resistance, temperature, and capacitance, which can come in super handy around the house or on your automotive projects. Now, around the house, before getting a multimeter, I am assuming you have a non-contact voltage tester like this one, which is the NCVT 3P, which I really prefer from Klein Tools, or an outlet tester like this one with a GFCI test button. I would definitely say these two are on your list prior to a multimeter. But if you already have these and you want to step it up with a little bit more troubleshooting capability, the MM600 for Klein Tools I think works well, but let me know what you guys use. What multimeter do you have and why? Is there a reason you bought that? Pretty simple. I actually stepped up to the MM600 because it has the carrying pouch. So those alligator clips, the K-type thermocouples, all that, I just end up losing if I don't have it in the pouch and I can kind of store it all together. Now, before you guys take off, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We have multiple videos coming out per week to help you around the house with your repair and improvement projects, and we'll catch you on the next video. Take care.